Unlike Socrates and Plato, Aristotle was not an Athenian. He was born about 15 years after the death of Socrates and moved to Athens in 367 BC, where he joined Plato's academy. Later, he became tutor to one of history's most powerful figures, Alexander the Great. After some years in exile, Aristotle returned to Athens and founded his own school, the Lyceum. Aristotle's body of work is extraordinary. It covers subjects as wide-ranging as botany, biology, psychology, chemistry, meteorology, astronomy, and physics, as well as logic, metaphysics, ethics, aesthetics, political theory, epistemology, that's the theory of knowledge, the philosophy of science, and the history of ideas. In the next two videos on Aristotle, I will focus on his logic, his metaphysics, and his ethics. Before we dive into Aristotle's logic, it helps to see where he fits into the bigger story of how human thought developed. The pre-Socratic thinkers, like Thales, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and Parmenides, were the first to ask questions about nature, change, and the universe. But their ideas were often scattered and speculative. Then came Socrates, who brought discipline and focus to philosophy. He taught people to question assumptions, to define terms clearly, and to reason carefully. Still, some of his arguments were questionable. For example, the slave boy argument in Plato's Meno, which seems to assume more than it proves. Plato went even further, proposing a world of forms, perfect external versions of things that exist beyond the physical world. Yet Plato's theory also makes some leaps of its own, since he offers little substantial evidence that such a realm truly exists. Aristotle admired both Socrates and Plato, but he wanted to ground philosophy in observation, experience, and reasoning. For Aristotle, logic was the key tool that was able to separate good reasoning from bad. What is logic? Firstly, as a discipline, it is nothing that should instill fear. Logic is the study of how we think clearly and correctly. Aristotle was the first to study it systematically. He focused on what we now call deductive reasoning, the kind of reasoning where, if the starting points, the premises, are true, the conclusion must also be true. Here's a simple example. Premise 1. All Shetlanders are UK citizens. Premise 2. Some Shetlanders are male. Conclusion. Therefore, some UK citizens are male. Both statements are true, and the conclusion necessarily follows. This is a valid argument, and Aristotle called reasoning of this kind a syllogism, a Greek word meaning a piece of reasoning. A valid syllogism is one where it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. But not every argument that sounds logical really is logical. Take this one. Premise 1. All dogs are mammals. Premise 2. Some mammals are carnivores. Conclusion. Therefore, all dogs are carnivores. The conclusion is true, but it doesn't actually follow from the premises. The pattern of reasoning is faulty. Consider this one. Premise 1. All birds are animals. Premise 2. Some animals can swim. Conclusion. Therefore, all birds can swim. Here, both premises are true, but the conclusion is false, so the pattern cannot be trusted. Logic, then, isn't just about whether each statement is true, it's about the structure of the argument, how the ideas connect, Some invalid arguments can even have true premises and a true conclusion, but the link between them is flawed. Thus, we have good syllogisms and bad syllogisms, and logic is the tool that helps us tell the difference. Aristotle's rules for a good argument establish that most valid arguments follow a few simple rules. At least one statement must be positive or affirmative, in other words, not a no statement. All Shetlanders are UK citizens, and some Shetlanders are male, are both affirmative. At least one premise must be universal, something that applies to all members of a group, not just some. For example, all birds are animals. And if one of the premises is negative, then the conclusion must also be negative. No reptiles are birds. Aristotle believed that all valid reasoning could be expressed using this simple structure, what we now call syllogistic logic. Although later philosophers expanded logic far beyond Aristotle's framework, his system remained the standard for almost 2,000 years. Aristotle also believed that logic is the foundation of all scientific knowledge. Every proper explanation, he said, has the same structure as a syllogism, but a special kind called a demonstration. A demonstration doesn't just show that something is true, it shows why it is true. For example, imagine we want to explain why metal expands when it is heated. We might say that heat makes the particles inside the metal move faster, and that extra movement pushes them further apart. If no deeper explanation can be given, that is where the reasoning stops. We have reached a basic principle. That is how Aristotle saw science, as a chain of explanations built on clear logical connections starting from fundamental truths called axioms. He described logic not as a science in itself, but as a tool of the sciences, the instrument that allows us to reason correctly in any field. Aristotle wanted logic to reflect the world of people, animals, plants, and change. He was not interested in imaginary worlds or theoretical languages. He wanted reasoning to describe how things actually are. Later thinkers, like Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein, developed modern symbolic logic, which looks very different and does amount to a theoretical language. But Aristotle's aim was simpler, to show that everyday language, when used carefully, can reveal truth about the world in which we live. Not all kinds of reasoning fit neatly into his rules. His account of logic was not perfect, but it was revolutionary for its time. It gave philosophers and scientists a method for recognizing good reasoning and avoiding bad reasoning, and it taught people to look for structure, not just for content, thus shaping the way human beings have thought ever since. Even today, when we learn to analyse arguments or think critically, we're still following the path Aristotle first mapped out over 2,000 years ago. Aristotle's logic was the first great system for understanding how reasoning works. It showed that clear thinking has a structure and that structure can be studied. In the next video, we will see how Aristotle's logic connects with his metaphysics, his attempt to explain what reality itself must be like if such reasoning is to hold true.